Everybody? Who's doing it? No, no. Okay, good. There's the lights. Okay. All right, this one. No, not that one. Before. After that. No, after that. The next prayer after that. No, not there. Sangha. This is the one now. Taking refuge. That's the one. Sangye chadang soke chognamla jangchu badu dagni kyap suchi dagi chanyen gibe sonam ki dola penchir sangye drupa shok sangye chadang soke chognamla jangchu badu dagni kyap suchi dagi chanyen gibe sonam ki dola penchir sangye drupa shok Sangye charang soke chognamla, jangchu padu dagni kyap suchi. Dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki, drola penchir sangye drupashok. That's it. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so yesterday we were looking at kind of all the nuts and bolts, of this Buddhist approach to life. Because the general idea, the basic idea in Buddhism, Buddha is this person who lived a couple of thousand years ago in India, developed, sort of educated in this amazing system that's been around for 3,000 years. As the Dalai Lama likes to say, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. And then I like to joke that we modern people probably think it was Freud 100 years ago. We're so arrogant. It's kind of humbling to hear that this knowledge we're discussing here, coming from these Indians more than 3,000 years ago, pretty amazing. And knowledge about what? Not something in the sky or something mystical, but about the human mind and what its potential is. Basically, you could say that. So Buddha eventually diverged in his own direction, specifically in relation to his own experiential findings about the nature of self. And since then, there's been so-called Buddhism. The bottom line in Buddhism, really, it looks very, especially Tibetan Buddhism, it looks incredibly kind of ritualistic and esoteric and confusing and so much philosophy, and you kind of can't find the point of it all, But when it comes right down to it, you could say that Buddha's expertise is the mind, which is surprising to us. We don't think that. We think if it's religion, it must be a soul, but Buddha doesn't use a word like that. There's no equivalent. Buddha talks about the mind. Like we talked, of course, yesterday, it's quite a radical difference, his view of what the mind is and how it functions. So, of course, we refer to it as the brain. He doesn't deny we have a brain. You can't deny that. But he wouldn't say, he would say our consciousness, our mind is not physical. It doesn't come from a parent. It's not a function of the brain. It's not meant to be arrogant, but I would say, without insulting neuroscientists, that our mind, the brain is a physical indicator of what's happening in the mind, but only, as we discussed yesterday, only at the fairly gross levels. With Buddhism, coming again from these Indians, asserts much subtler levels of consciousness, of mind, and using this amazing technique that the world vaguely knows as mindfulness, but which is coming from this extremely sophisticated psychological skill called single, it's a technique that enables us to get this single pointed concentration, but to a level of subtlety we don't even posit as existing in modern psychology or neuroscience. It's dramatically different. So the Buddha's view of the mind, what he's found from his own experience, and remember, he's not a creator. That means his knowledge is not coming from on high. It's not from revelation. It's not a belief system. It's not just speculation. He didn't make it up. He's observed it. That all minds have this extraordinary potential, finally, to become this word Buddha. The Bud implies, this first syllable in the Sanskrit word, and the same in the Tibetan, Sangye, the first syllable implies, and this is very shocking if we think of it from comparison, say, with our modern views of the mind. This first syllable implies, as what Buddha has found, that it implies the utter eradication from our mind of all neuroses, all fears, all dramas, all ego, all depression, anxiety, anger, attachment, jealousy, low self-esteem, these things that we are intimately familiar with, and which I think in our modern culture in our neuroscience and psychology, we assume that they are normal parts of a normal person, so normal that you'd be abnormal if you didn't have them. Things like that, that's really the point. So it's hard to hear. What do you mean get rid of all anger, all ego forever? We think we'd be just like a half a person. It's so weird for us. We better really know what he means by this, But not only can we do that, like we discussed yesterday, that's the first wing of the bird. That's the wisdom wing. We can develop our mind to this incredible degrees of subtlety and clarity and joy and fulfillment and, and wisdom. And then the second wing of the bird, this compassion wing, that second syllable, da, implies, and again, this is weird, the development to perfection of everything else in our mind. Love, compassion, wisdom, kindness. This is what the word Buddha means. It's hard for us to hear this because it's not what we think. This is the Buddha's view. So even if you don't go all the way there, even not that, but even just to think that implies that, and this is what his point is, that anger and low self-esteem and ego and jealousy and despair are not in the core of our being. We can therefore, by becoming familiar with our minds, this is where these meditation techniques come in, these practical psychological skills, to learn to become deeply familiar with our mind at the level of deep, subtle thoughts, in order to become familiar, in order to hear what is going on in our head well before it vomits out the mouth, well before you want to murder your child, And this is our problem, I think it was yesterday, that our biggest problem in our culture is that we don't notice what's happening in our mind until it's your body shaking, until it hits your body, until it becomes what we call feeling. So the commonest question we ask is, well, what am I going to do when I'm about to murder my husband? Well, it's a bit late, to wait to notice you want to murder him. How about catching your mind much sooner than that? And this is the skill that Buddha gives us, even forget getting the long-term result. Begin to become really familiar in a very conscious, intentional way with what on earth is going on in this crazy head of ours. That's not mystical. That's not religion. That's practical psychology. And who on the planet wouldn't want to do that? That's the essence of it. So it's obvious that we can get rid of the rubbish and can develop to perfection the goodness. This is implying the methodology. We better learn to distinguish the difference. It's very clear. We discussed all this yesterday, the concept of karma, we looked at different ways of utilizing this approach. So today I wanted to talk about how we then help others on the basis of the work we do ourselves. And this approach we discussed yesterday of learning to abide by the laws of karma, and just to remind us that it's a very common word in the world, but there's lots of views about what it means. Well, in the Buddha's view, it's very practical. Essentially, the Buddha's idea is that everything we think and feel, and therefore what we say and do on the basis of that, that's the very process itself. That's the main cause of who we become and who we are. And this is a very big shock, because we believe it's the father and the husband and the weather and the bad politicians, all the nice things out there. We believe it's out there that our happiness comes from. It's out there that the suffering comes from. That our mind plays a role, but it's not the main thing. Buddha is the exact opposite. And initially, it's quite shocking to hear that. In other words, when you, like you talked yesterday, simple event like stubbing your toe. We believe the stubbing of the toe is the chair is the main cause of the suffering. The Buddha would say, not even the pain that you feel in your toe, but the response to it, which is anger, that's the main source of the suffering. This is already a revelation to us. It's not being punitive or mean. Like your husband can shout at you, but that's not the main cause of your suffering. And he's saying that. Equally, he's saying your husband being kind to you isn't the main cause of your happiness. We think it is. And this is the basis in Buddhism of why we have such strong attachment and then strong anger. Attachment is this constant emotional hunger to get all the nice things because we're convinced that that'll get us happiness. And then anger when attachment doesn't get the nice thing. We go between these two 1,000 times a day. And this is really a major suffering, running between this emotional hunger to get the lovely things and upset and angry and resentful and depressed or frustrated or annoyed or irritated when the bad things happen. The Buddha's view is, yes, bad things happen. Yes, good things happen, but they're not the main source of our pain and they're not the main source of our happiness. And this itself is the biggest shock. We need to look into that. And the implication of that is, if that's true, then I'm the boss. I can change my mind. I can change my response to things. I think we know this. It's just hard work, you know. That's what we discussed yesterday. So this is the wisdom wing, if you like. Wisdom, because one of the problems with all these unhappy states of mind is that they cause us to feel very stressed and unhappy. Anger makes you unhappy. Jealousy makes you unhappy. Anxiety makes you unhappy. We know that. But the other thing about these states of mind, and this is harder to see, is that when we're caught up in the attachment, the anger, the jealousy, the depression, not only are we feeling miserable, but those states of mind distort what's out there. We know this. When you're full of attachment for that delicious chocolate cake, you're completely exaggerating the deliciousness of the cake and its power to make you happy. So then when you finally get the cake, 3 pieces later, you're totally disappointed because all you end up with is a stuffed stomach and no happiness. Where did it go? You know what happened? So learning to work on our mind and beginning to empower our own mind, our own approach, our own attitude, learning to know that we can change these. And this is not meant to be, again, punitive. You know, it's practical. There's a saying in Buddhism, if you can change something, please change it. But what if you can't? Change your mind, you know. But this is the hardest one for us. So if we can do this a little bit and become more stable within ourselves, then what happens is we start to open up. So the other aspect of these unhappy states of mind is that they exaggerate, they distort the things out there, and they also cut us off from others. You know yourself, when you're very depressed, you're completely isolated from others. When you're really angry, all the ugly others are out there, you wish they'd all drop dead. They're always separate from others, is being caught up in the unhappiness, caught up in attachment, caught up in jealousy. We're separate from others. We're lonely and bereft and distressed. You know, we know that. But as we lessen the neuroses and grow our own potential for more contentment, this is the literal result, which means more fulfilled, more happy. You're also breaking down the barriers that they create between self and other. So then you start to open your eyes and go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. Everybody's suffering. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody's caught up in their misery, you know. We're not even talking about the misery of the really bad physical things happening. We're just talking about the misery of being attached and angry and jealous. That's terrible suffering. You know? Then we can start to have compassion for others, start to have empathy for others, because we see we're all in the same boat. We all want to be happy. We're all kind of thinking it's the cake that'll give us to us, or the husband, or the next door neighbor, or the weather, or the politicians. No, it's our mind, our approach, our attitudes. I think we kind of know this. Buddha didn't make this up. He's not a boss. He doesn't own copyright on this view. He's an expert at it, I'd suggest. So how does it help us get more compassion then? Let's look at that. Because you've lessened your own neuroses, you've lessened your own unhappiness, you become... What happened here? I don't want to look at myself. Where are these people? Hang on, I'll get the gallery again. Where's the gallery?
Yeah,
it's not coming this time. I see, that's what the reason was. There you go. Great. Good. Okay, fantastic. Okay, people. All right. So let's look at how we then can grow to cultivate this sense of connectedness with others, you know. Because we know, as I said, when we're caught up in anger and jealousy and resentment and low self-esteem, we're separate from others. When we're caught up, we have more contentment, more fulfillment. Therefore, they're more kind, more empathy, more love, more compassion. It's really clear. And then we're more connected. And then we're the beneficiary of that. So this idea of compassion, the way Buddhism talks about the levels that we can develop, are pretty incredible. I remember when I first heard all these teachings, I thought, these people are crazy. How can they talk about that level of compassion where you literally have compassion for every living being, including the pedophiles and the wackos and the politicians you don't like? This seems too weird for us. But I remember here, I thought, that's too much, you know, how can you be like that? And I remember hearing, and it seemed too high somehow, that kind of level of compassion. Remember the Dalai Lama saying, if you want to help others, practice compassion. If you want to help yourself, practice compassion. So this is a really important point. So the direct beneficiary of the first level of practice, like I said, is yourself. Basically, the first level of practice, you mind your own business, you leave other people alone, and you start working on yourself, put yourself together. You know, you're the beneficiary. But then you start to help others, you're also the beneficiary. You know yourself, one kind action to someone else makes you feel good. Don't feel bad about that. So practical. One of the commonest things we say is, go around helping other people, but what about me, we'll say. What about poor me, But we see we can do it properly, not out of self-pity or not out of this craving to be seen as a good girl. We do it from our heart. We are the beneficiary, there's no question. So let's look at all the kind of practical techniques, the approaches in this bodhisattva path, this path of compassion. What are the approaches there? Well, there's all these series of techniques, that, as we might know from reading all the commentaries. The very first one, so there's this gradual process of developing love and compassion, great compassion, a series of kind of steps on the path to this, and then finally culminating in this state, in this word. It's the Sanskrit word. I think it's just, I don't know, I can't think of many good words in English to translate it. Bodhicitta. It's referring to this kind of outrageous level of mind on the basis of incredible compassion and love, where you actually now, you're so together, you have so much empathy, so much affection for others, that you become like a mother for all beings. They are the ones in your mind uppermost. That's pretty intense. That's hard to imagine. That's what they say is simple. The very first step in this is this practice, they call it this practice of equanimity. Just look at that, because that itself will take the entire morning. We can happily discuss just this one, but it's really important to understand it. First of all, remember what is compassion and what is love. How do you define those terms? We've all got different definitions. But from the Buddhist perspective, remember, as we talked yesterday, you've got the neurotic, unhappy, deluded, miserable states of mind. Then you have the positive, virtuous, useful, productive states of mind. They're very clearly distinguished. And this is something that's surprising to us. As I said before, we take them all, we give them all equal status. A normal person has a bit of attachment, a bit of love, a bit of anger, a bit of jealousy. As long as you don't have too much of the rubbish, you're okay. Buddha's more dramatic, like I said. You can get rid of all the rubbish and develop all the other stuff to perfection. So this equanimity, what is it? It's very precise. These terms are very precise. So before that, we get to that. Before we get to that, the definition of love is it begins with a thought, and then you grow it into affection with familiarity. May you be happy. You can say you have love for somebody if you see them and you delight in their happiness. That's love. It might be small, but it can grow. Now, if you have attachment for somebody, and usually you have love for people you're attached to, and you're only attached to those you love, they come together, and we almost think they're the same. They're totally different. You want your beloved child to be happy day and night, but it's totally mixed with attachment, which means your baby looks like the most divine baby on the planet. You can see a photo of 1,000 babies, and you'll see yours like a little halo in the middle of someone. You'll grab it. I won't see the difference, I promise. You understand? When you're attached to somebody, they're like shining, when you're attached to someone, you walk in a room and you're expecting the beautiful boyfriend to be there. In 1 second, you can see he's not there. You're devastated. Everybody else looks so boring, isn't it? Your object of attachment is so shiny and delicious. That's the person you love. So this is equity. So the compassion is, may you not suffer. If you reach out. I think in the Western psychology, we tend to say empathy and compassion are different, but from the Buddhist perspective, you can say they're the same. You see a person suffering and your heart goes out. May they not suffer, And these we can grow to limitless degrees. The very first step, it demands a big shift in the logic of why we want someone to be happy, to love them, and why we want someone not to suffer. This is the thing about equanimity. So right now, we know automatically we do have love for some people, so we have, remember these three poisons we discussed yesterday? There's the neurotic, deluded, ridiculous states of mind, the virtuous, love, positive ones, and this third lot. Wait a minute, that's the wrong one I'm saying. Wait a minute. What am I saying? Okay, what am I saying? Oh, no, sorry. In relation to the three poisons, remember the three poisons of ignorance, attachment, and aversion. All the neurotic states of mind, the neurotic ones, all subsumed these three. There are thousands, they all come down to these three. And we discussed this a lot yesterday. These are very important to understand. So, if you look at the regular world, you've got objects of attachment, which is your cake and your, football. Objects of aversion, is like cricket, probably that'd be indifference. And then things you're indifferent to. There's attachment, aversion, and indifference. Now, here in this practice on the compassion wing, we're specifically referring to all the beings, the sentient beings. Objects of attachment, who are they called? They're called friends. General term. Who are the objects of your aversion or your anger? Enemy. We mightn't use that word, but it's a useful term here for the people you don't like. And then the third category is stranger. And this is kind of shocking. That's 99.999% of the entire world. So how do we feel about the friends? They're the shiny, delicious ones. Mm-hmm. And we're attached to them. That's why they look shiny and delicious. And we happen to have love for them, which is great. May you be happy. May you be happy. But as Lama Zopa says, it's unstable love because it's contingent upon attachment, particularly upon whether they fulfill your attachment. So as long as you do what my attachment wants, smile at me, love me, adore me, give me what I need, I'm prepared to love you. I know it sounds cruel, but we know it's true. If you leave me for a younger version after 27 years, believe me, my love will be turned off like a tap. And you will go from the friend category immediately to the enemy one. With certainty, we know that. You stopped fulfilling my needs, stopped fulfilling my attachment's needs. It sounds cruel, but we can see it's true. Now, the third lot, so the first lot, they're the ones you adore and have compassion for, so it's very limited. Or it could be the politicians you like, whose views agree with you, the musicians who play the music you like. They're the ones we have attachment, and therefore they're the ones we think about and would like them to be happy. We would like them not to suffer. They're the ones for whom we have love and compassion. But it's contingent upon attachment. Utterly. It's got strings attached, as we would say. We know that, So this game's quite difficult. We're saying, you mean I'm supposed to love the people who are mean to me? What are you talking about? This is the point about shifting our attitude. This is the point I'm getting. This is what equanimity is. So right now, the logic ego uses for whether I want you to be happy or not is whether or not you fulfill my attachment needs. So the minute you don't, then you're going to go to the enemy category. Unless, of course, usually with children. I mean, mothers will love their kids until the cows come home. Even if they're mean and ugly and ridiculous, they still want their kids to be happy. But it's unusual to, want your partner who's cheated on you to be happy, isn't it? So it's pretty difficult. Or anybody who just doesn't do what you want, your ex-girlfriend or your friend down the road, whatever. So equanimity, so then, okay, the second category, the objects of aversion. So aversion is the bare bones state of mind that arises in a volatile way when it's called anger, or mild aversions of it, irritation, upset, frustrated, annoyed, polite terms. They're all aversion, anger, mild anger. So I know we get angry with our beloveds, but it's sort of, we go back to having attachment again, isn't it? So, okay, we have attachment, and those people are of animals, could be the poodle. You adore your poodle, you adore your pussycat, you adore your dog, attachment to it. Then you have the ones whom you have aversion to, who are the ones who specifically, proactively don't do what your attachment wants. They usually do what your attachment doesn't want. And that's why they're called enemies, and you put them distant. They appear ugly to you, and you do not want them to be happy. You do not want them not to suffer. That'd be the rat, wouldn't it, or the cockroach? Not to mention the ex-husband. Do you understand? The third lot, strangers, 99.999% of the universe. And how do we feel about them? We couldn't care less. And why? Because they neither harm us nor help us. So when we think of it this way, we should be embarrassed at how self-centered we are. Our love and compassion is contingent upon whether you do what I want. My aversion is because you don't do what I want, and I couldn't care less. You could all drop dead if you do neither. So we should be a bit embarrassed. That's how we all are. Monkeys and dogs are the same. We're all the same. This is the world, and we consider it normal. You hear this? So it seems kind of a bit advanced to think to get beyond that, doesn't it? Why should I, we think, Of course I want those to be happy who do what I want. Of course I do. We think it's normal. So what's all this about then? Well, the Buddha's just saying we've got this potential. We've got the potential to have far more wisdom and far more clarity and far more love and far more compassion than we imagine. And don't be embarrassed about it. You're the beneficiary of it. Because when things are bad and things are a disaster and your hubby leaves you and the world collapses or your house burns down like in Los Angeles, you don't lose the plot because you've worked on your mind, you become stable, both in the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. In other words, the Buddha's general idea is we've got this incredible potential to develop our consciousness, our mind, our being to unbelievable levels of clarity and wisdom and compassion. I mean, I don't know, I'm looking forward to that. I love it. One step at a time, because we're the beneficiaries. Okay, and you can also be at the bonus benefit others because we are in the same boat. We all know we really appreciate people who have compassion and kindness and who work hard to help others. We all know we really admire people this way. We do. I mean, people, even if you're not a Buddhist, you hear about the Dalai Lama. Anybody with half a brain can see he's got some qualities. I mean, he was 16. He's 90 this year. He was 16 when he had to run the country. Okay, only 6 million people, but that's quite a few people. He became the boss, 16, age of 16. And right at that time was when the Chinese communists came barging in and destroyed their country and ruined it. And now 70 years later, 70, 85 more, no, 75 years later, he's still doing it, still working. And he's still, anybody who hears him talk and see him, he's still this happy fellow, who cracks jokes about his enemies. He hasn't lost the plot yet, but he hasn't stopped for 75 years. Working for his own people, and then since they all had to leave the country in 59 and still continue to leave the country, unbelievable suffering for them, he never stopped in the whole world, scientifically, in religious world, in the scientific world, in the diplomatic world, in the social world, he never stopped trying to be of benefit to the world. Everyone can see that. And somehow you can see he's a happy, kind fellow. He's kind of like happy and relaxed and easygoing, which if you look at his life, it doesn't make sense, I mean, just the suffering and pain we have when our house burns down, the suffering and pain when we lose one child. I'm not trying to be rude. And then his whole entire country, and he's like a father to those 6 million people. He hasn't lost the plot. So for me, if you're thinking so, I think about, well, if he's an example of all this methodology I'm looking at called being Buddhist, then if he's an example, he's the proof of the pudding, well, I'm okay, I'm happy. I'd like to be like him, please. Good to see an example, of what you're trying to do. So let's look at this equanimity then. Let's get back to that one. Because that's the basis. What I'm getting at is this. Right now, the logic of ego is I will love you if you do what my attachment wants. And I won't love you. I'll actually have aversion for you. And I will not want you to be happy if you stop doing what my attachment wants. And I won't care about you if you do neither. I mean, it's blunt, but I think if we look at it, it's true. You might read, we all read about the world going on all the time now. All countries in the world seem to be so open to us. We hear everything about iPads and God knows what, But still, you read about some country whose name you don't even know how to pronounce. You see the pictures, you can have some compassion, but it really is very distant, As soon as, when I got the New York Times, right, I get the New York Times, and they've got these different sections, and they've got one section that's called Australia. Even though I'm an American, I've got a passport. In 2006, I had got my citizenship, right? And I said to the lady, I said, can I keep my other passports? I've got British and Australian, you see. She said, we don't mind how many passports you have as long as you have allegiance for the United States. So I think I'm supposed to feel like an American. I'm not sure how it feels yet. I don't know. I'm trying to learn. I've been here since 1994, okay? I should be knowing by now that's 30 years, isn't it? Anyway, I'm doing my best to feel like an American. But it means I'm allowed to criticize. This is my home, you see. Anyway, what am I saying? Oh, yeah, so I'm still feeling like an Australian, though, don't I? And I sound like one. You understand? So I'll read. So as soon as I hear, like, about problems in Australia, I read them. Oh, look at that. Oh, I know that's my people, because them. It's familiar. We're like that. It's natural. But if we see this country whose name we can't even say, and there's some kind of earthquake, and instead of 72,000 people dead, we go, oh, really? That's terrible. Please pass the sugar. Do you understand? I mean, it's sort of natural. We're like that. We're all like that. Because we have attachment, aversion, and indifference. That's how we are. And then it seems like a big ask. You mean I'm supposed to have compassion for everybody? I'd die of exhaustion, would say. How could you do that? And that's what this is now this is an interesting point before we even get into the meaning of equanimity. This is the point that's very shocking for us. Try and hear this. This is very shocking. This is one of the things about how our compassion gets mixed with attachment, and mixed with aversion. This is why yesterday we were discussing you've got to do the wisdom wing first. So right now, there we are, a normal person with lots of attachment And the bottom line with attachment, more than for friends or for anything, or for sex or drugs, the deepest energy of attachment in us, this drive, is we only want everything to be lovely. Get my point? We yearn and crave that everything will work nicely. Everything will turn up well, everything will happen nicely, the traffic will be good, the coffee will be nice, the people will behave. And as soon as the unnice thing happens, we know we have panic attacks, it's called anger or anxiety. Because attachment can't cope with things not being nice. It's a simple but profound point. Think about this. So there we have compassion as well, which is in the good side, the positive side. We've got compassion. So there we are with attachment for everything to be lovely. And then you suddenly see suffering somewhere. And we can't cope. It's too unbearable. So then we think, well, of course I'm suffering. I've got compassion. We really do believe we suffer because we have compassion. No, this is the part that's shocking. You don't suffer because you have compassion. You suffer because you have attachment for things to be lovely and you're experiencing aversion and even anger when you see the unhappy thing. We mix the attachment, we mix the anger with the compassion. And this is why when you understand, you can't possibly suffer if you don't have attachment and anger. And that's what Buddha is saying. We can get rid of those. Then what you've got left is unbelievable levels of love and compassion. And even though the suffering is unbearable, that's why the Dalai Lama is a great example. He hasn't lost the plot. He does not have anxiety. He does not have PTSD. He does not have therapists. Please hear my point. It's hard work because he's only got love and compassion and the virtues. The others are all gone. You have to reduce that. Therefore, technically, he doesn't suffer. It's hard to hear. It's almost impossible. Buddha's essential point is suffering comes from the delusions and neuroses. And happiness and courage and empathy and love comes from the positive states. If you've developed those to an incredible degree, you'll be sad, you'll be tired after working hard to help people, but you'll wake up all perky next day and carry on helping people. This is one that's really interesting to think about. In fact, incredibly hard to imagine, but this is the truth. This is the Buddhist approach. Doesn't go back to equanimity. What is it? So as I said, really, before you start to develop this love and compassion for everybody, you've got to shift the assumption of ego. The assumption of ego is, I will love you, I will want you to be happy, and I'll have compassion for you as long as you do what my attachment wants, and that's labeled friend. Of course, I don't want you to be happy, and I don't care if you suffer, if you've harmed me. That's called an enemy. And of course, I don't care if you're a stranger, if you've done neither. That's the view here. We can see that. So what we have to do before we even begin to develop love and compassion for everybody is shift the logic for why I want someone to be happy and why I want you to be free of suffering. Now, ego only wants it for those who do what our attachment wants. But this equanimity is based on it is the view that we cultivate. When we have to do the analysis to see that everybody, friend, enemy, and stranger, from their point of view, from their point of view, not from ours, from their point of view, they are exactly the same as each other, insofar as they each want to be happy and each don't want to suffer. That becomes the logic. Then everything shifts. That's hard to hear. So how do we get this equanimity? Well, let's do it. I'll just talk about it and even think of it, visualize as I'm talking. So we've got a friend. Let's say you think of your friend. It could be even, let's say you're a grandma and it's your divine grandchild whom you adore, you're attached to, and you want them to be happy. Let's just think. Anybody, doesn't matter. Or you think of your dog. Mostly we're more attached to our animals than people these days, I think. Think of your dog, whom you adore. That's your object of attachment, okay? Or your grandchild. Then you have the enemy. I mean, maybe it's an ugly dog who's mean and nasty and you can't stand the sight of them. They kind of bite your dog. Or smelly kid next door, who's mean. You understand my point? Something simple. Don't think of big dramas like wars. Just think simple life. What's equanimity? Forget even the third category called stranger, which means a dog you don't care about and a next door neighbor you don't care about. They're like strangers. They neither upset you nor harm you, nothing. But the two, especially the friend and the enemy one. You think of the love you have, the wish that your dog be happy day and night. and you're attached to it. And this other smelly dog. You know, you don't want to think about the other dog. You couldn't care less. So let's say your two dogs are playing. All you're caring about is your precious dog. All you're caring about is your precious grandchild playing with that ugly, smelly kid next door. So where does the equanimity come in? You step back, shut up, Robina, look at it freshly. My precious grandchild, my precious dog, and that ugly, smelly dog or smelly grandchild, the smelly kid, they are exactly the same as my grandchild. Insofar as internally they're driven every second by the wish only to be happy, and every second driven by the wish only to never suffer. Everybody has that. And that's the beginning of this equanimity. Then already you still mightn't love or have compassion for them yet, but you're stopped in your tracks. And suddenly, instead of seeing a smelly kid whom you can't stand, you're now seeing, maybe you're beginning to see a human being there. Not judge them in terms of their ugliness, you know, in comparison with your precious grandchild. You suddenly see them slightly differently. You still maybe protect your grandchild because maybe that kid really is mean, but you suddenly see a human being now and you realize they're exactly the same as your precious grandchild deep inside. Not same as being intelligent, not the same as even being good. Maybe that dog really is a monster. That's not the issue here. This is the point that's hard to see. That's how we judge people. But driven inside, driven by the wish only to be happy. But the poor dog, due to its negative nature, that poor kid next door, due to its negative nature, they're mean and ugly. But they're driven by the wish to be happy. When we can begin to see this, the whole world appears different. That's equanimity. It's not easy. Because all we see is our view of attachment and aversion. Ugly person, nice person. It's so superficial. And one of the, so now let's look at some of the logical reasons we need to use to develop this equanimity. This is really obvious. So bring the stranger one in third. We'll bring the stranger at the third category as well. So let's just, I will use this example. It's sort of a silly example, but you'll see it works. Let's say, you know, Maria's my friend, and she's got this bloke down the road. Say Joe lives at number 7. And she tells me about her friend Joe. And her friend Joe, he's got migraines, let's say. You say migraines, don't we in America? What do you say? Migraines? Migraines, thank you. English say migraines. I'm English as well, you see. So I'll say a migraine. So there's Joe, Maria's friend, down the road, okay? And he gets migraines. So I hear it, but he's very distant. I've sort of vaguely seen him on the street, but I really couldn't care. Do you see my point? He hasn't touched my life. Why should I care? That's how we are. So I think, oh, poor Joe, does he really? But it doesn't go far. And then, you know, again, Maria, pass the coffee. We start chatting again. Do you see my point? It's really obvious, isn't it? Now, you listen. I meet Joe, and suddenly we fall in love. Look at the difference. I think about Joe day and night. He moves me into number 6. Where was it, number 7? Suddenly I think of Joe day and night. Oh, poor Joe, he's you know, and so, and I help him with money. I send him to the doctors. I drive him to the hospital, and I think about it all the time. And I have such compassion, such love for Joe, isn't it? Now he chucks me out and he moves Mary in, and now he moves into the stranger, into the enemy category. So 1 minute he's a stranger, and I couldn't care less about his migraines. Next minute, I think day and night about his migraines. I have love and compassion. And the third one, I hope he suffers with this moment. I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? So what's the difference? The logic of equanimity here is if you swap the story and you look at Joe, you ask Joe when he's my stranger, tell me about your headaches. He will say they're unbearable and all he wants is to be happy. You ask him about his headaches when he's my beloved, he doesn't feel different. His headaches are still terrible. And he only wants to be happy. And you ask him how he feels about my headaches when he's when he's my enemy. I mean, it's obvious, you know. There's not a fraction of difference from the point of view of Joe. But 1 minute he's a beloved, a stranger, boring, I couldn't care. Next minute he's a beloved and I'll give my life for him. Next minute I want to kill him. But that doesn't have has nothing, no bearing on how Joe feels. That's what enemy, friend, and stranger mean. Can you see the point? And put yourself in Joe's position. That's even a more powerful analogy, I think. Yeah. There's you with your headache. And a person over here, you know, the person here who adores you, loves you and sees your headaches and has empathy. You know, you can see how moving that is. And then the person who hates you, they wish you'd suffer. You know how mean it is. But you still got your headache and you're suffering. And the stranger couldn't care less about you. There's no difference in you. 1 minute you're somebody's beloved, next minute you're someone else's enemy, and next minute you're someone else's stranger. There's no difference. It's just their projections on top of you. That's what we spend our lives doing. Projecting our divineness, ugliness, and boringness onto other sentient beings. And there's no fourth category. You either adore them, hate them, or couldn't care. That's enemy, friend, and stranger. Friend, stranger, friend, enemy, stranger. And they're the objects of the three poisons. This psychological model, kind of coherent, very powerful. You see my point? Yeah. Yeah. Question.
Could it be because our current society, there's so much depression and anxiety? Could it be that also that in a way is created for these mentality that people care less about?
I've lost completely. Say the question in another way.
Okay, yeah. So the current society, there's a lot of anxiety and depression.
It's called attachment and aversion from the Buddhist perspective,
yeah.
And not the current society. It's human nature and animal nature since beginningless time. I'd like to add. So what's the question?
So there's a lot behind that, the reasons, but
using the Buddhist view, we're discussing that one. So what's the question?
But at the same time, wouldn't that also a cause for that to come up?
Which to come up?
For the depression and anxiety, wouldn't that also because we live in a society that people care less about each other? So people.
No, what we're pointing out here, which is this analysis from the Buddhist psychological view, this is how things are. You see, that's true. You agree, and of course you're asking for a reason. Well, it's because we have the thoughts mostly, but of course if it's what everybody does, we just buy into it. That's all you're saying. The whole world is like that. You're saying that. Well, that's all Buddha's saying. Can you see what I'm saying? Yes, we see this is true, not just me, but everybody's like this. So we're all like it, we all buy into it. I agree with you, totally. Are we communicating, do you think? Yeah, absolutely. So this is a tough one, though. I mean, and again, it seems so holy somehow. I've got to love everybody. Oh, what a drag, But you've got to keep remembering what we're trying to do here is see the benefit to oneself of this. This is not meant to be sort of kind of self-centered. In other words, when we think, like I said before, if you're a bit depressed and sad, then someone says you've got to love other people. Well, what about me, we'll say. We do feel like we're being left out, but really it's not wrong to say this is to help to love others, but you are the beneficiary. Never forget that. It's the potential of your mind to be hugely more open and more courageous. And then when you are more open and you can begin to at least see that other mean, ugly dog, you wish it'd go away and you couldn't even kill it, it was going to upset your dog. Maybe you shift a bit. It wants to be happy just like my doggy, It's profound already, just that thought alone. Are we communicating? So you're the beneficiary of that. So instead of if you're really fanatically, attached to one political view, as soon as you read the other view, you have a complete panic attack. So if you have this view more, you mightn't like their views, that's fine. But it won't make you have a mental breakdown. Because you're more kind of spacious and you're more empathetic and you see the humanity there, When I was very radically politically active years before I was a Buddhist, there's no way I could cope with anybody who had any different view. I'd have a complete panic attack. You understand me? You'd fight and argue and be sort of fundamentalist. What people do is look at them, look at us. And then as I became I preferred the Buddhist view and kind of gradually moved into this one, what I'm discussing here. I remember one time on a plane, this guy next to me started talking, and he turned out to be a white supremacist. I was fascinated by his mind. I didn't freak out and want to move. I didn't agree with a word he said, but I wanted to hear what he thought. It didn't give me a nervous breakdown. Are you hearing my point? Yeah. I remember one guy, this sounds a bit weird, I'll tell you, I meet different people. This one guy who's old and sad looking, and he told me, and I started having a conversation, so he opened up like I was his mum. He was going off to Thailand where he would go, it's a really intense story, go off to Thailand where he'd have sex with all the nice, lovely Thai girls, because he couldn't get girls in America or something. But he had this, excuse me, talking, it's very funny. It was before Viagra, what do they call it, Viagra. He had this little machine. He told me all about it, so I encouraged him, I want to hear. A machine that pumped saline, into his nice little organ and made it stick up. And he said all the Thai girls thought I was so beautiful because I could keep erect for hours. I didn't mind hearing this weird stuff in this bizarre man, I was interested in human mind. Do you understand my point here? That's an extreme discussion to have. Do you understand? He wasn't being slimy. He was just kind of all excited and wanted to hear about it. So I encouraged him to say, "Well, really, really, how does it work? You know, you press a button. Do you understand? We're all human beings, you know." I remember Dalai Lama, he had a particular close relationship with one southern politician who was really racist. I can't think of his name. And he knew he was, but he said he also really liked the Tibetans and the courage. So it was like, normally we think you can't be that way. If you're a racist, everything about you is wrong. It can't be true. You see my point? It just can't be true. But we're so nervous because we can't cope with anybody having a view that we don't have. And that's because we've got attachment. It doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you can't go off and be politically active. Be politically active. Because justice is justice, you know. Are we communicating here?
Yes.
You've got to see we are the beneficiary of it. You've got to see it. That's why I really admired when I was an old radical lefty. I remember I was especially helping about. I remember one time I was I was a hippie first, then I became a radical lefty. Then I started getting involved in London in the 60s, early 70s. For some reason, with the whole the one of kind of the empire and all the Algerians struggling against the French and the British struggling against and all the colonial the colonialists and racism and all that stuff, right? I remember a friend of mine she was white and she was a literary agent and she was George Jackson, the Soledad brother. Anybody remembers that time, early 70s, one of these Black Panthers, right at the time of the Panthers. He was in prison. He was very famous as a writer, George Jackson. And she was his literary agent. So we started a group in London, you know, called Friends of Soledad, supporting all these Panthers in prison in California. Oh, such a long story, I forget the reason I'm saying it. I remember, that's right, yeah. So I was really radical, and I loved Malcolm X. I thought he was an amazing human being, and I couldn't stand what's his name? Martin Luther King. I thought he was wimpy, you know. I was so ridiculous. Do you understand me? So rude of me, you know. A book now I've read that says actually they're really similar. They came together. Malcolm became more spacious and Martin became more radical or something. But in the end, I know with my political views at the time, I couldn't stand Martin Luther King. But now, an incredible human being. And I was so moved by it. He said, it is good to be angry, meaning it's good to find fault. It's good to see injustice. But then you say, what can I do to help? That's compassion. Instead of ranting and raving and blaming and having a panic attack, you know? And that's courage. In other words, you can see he's an example of what I'm saying. He never gave up. No matter how bad things got, he was so courageous, he never stopped. And it was clearly not from anger with him. That's the result if you have more equanimity. He saw the injustice. Dalai Lama's that way. Or that man in South Africa. There's a lovely book that they put together called Something About Joy. You know, Archbishop Tutu and Dalai Lama talking. It's hilarious, like two young boys giggling and laughing. They're hilarious. These two old blokes, you know. But here's the saying. He had this open mind. This one, what's his name? What's his name in South Africa? What's his amazing name? That man, the famous one. Mandela. I mean, he was so obviously an example of like this. He didn't have a panic attack and freak out in his fundamentalist politics. He had a brave mind who saw human beings. And they always talked about when he was in prison for like 27 years, he always had incredible dignity. And all his African white supremacist guards couldn't help but honor and respect him. Because he had this he saw the humanity in everybody. We know these words. This is a practical technique to help us get this view. And we are the beneficiary. Never stop thinking that. It's not just to be noble to benefit others. You seeing you're the beneficiary of it enables you then to benefit others because you see the humanity in everybody. You know? It keeps us sane instead of fanaticism. And attachment is fanatic. It only wants what I want. We have a mental breakdown, anxiety and panic attack and anger and rage and despair because we can't cope with anything that we don't agree with. That's why we suffer. It's not meant to be blaming us. Are we communicating?
Yes.
So ask me some questions if you'd like to. I mean, this is tough stuff, okay? Doesn't mean it's easy. Yes. Somebody. Anybody have their hand up? No? Yes.
Could you please
Oh.
go back and give kind of a definition and understanding of the two wings? You said one was
Enemy, friend, and stranger.
you said
The
that,
two wings.
compassion. One was wisdom and one was.
Oh, okay.
compassion.
Okay. You know how
So
we talked
just
yesterday.
to understand the distinction between the two wings of compassion and
Okay.
wisdom.
Okay. You know how we talked yesterday. Remember? Talking about okay, if you, as a practitioner, your very first step is to hear, if you're taking Buddhism, to think he's telling us, you know what, Robina, you're suffering. Oh, really? Am I? Okay, let me understand it. And he tells you about suffering. So the very first suffering he's telling you, as we all know, is that bad things happen. And I recognize that. So the very first level of practice, which is the first stage of the wisdom wing, because I can see everybody else is suffering too, isn't it? I can see everybody else is suffering. Now, let me give you a more simple example, Bob. It really helps. If, let's say, you discover that you're really, you got terrible, you're suffering, you're overweight, or you really got bad joints, or let's say you're just overweight, you've eaten fat, you know, and you're really sick, and you realize you're suffering, and you start reading from a nutritionist. A nutritionist tells you about yourself. You go, oh my God, it's really true. I'm suffering. So then you start looking at the rest of the world, Bob, and you see that people are overweight as well, everyone out there, and you rush around thinking, oh, I must help all those poor people. They're so overweight. But you don't even know, you've got no wisdom yet about how to fix yourself, right? Do you understand my point? You can't even fix yourself yet. So your first step is don't worry about other people. You've got to go to school and you've got to put your book in name word in put your head in books and learn all about nutrition for yourself. And someone, because you've got to put yourself together first. You get my point? That's the wisdom wing. So from the Buddhist perspective, karma and understanding the mind, it gives you the explanation for why you're suffering. And then you apply those to help you put yourself together and stop suffering. Now you're qualified to help others who are suffering. Just like the example I used. You can see the point now.
Absolutely.
It makes sense, doesn't it? And our trouble is when it comes to being compassionate, we never think, I've got to put myself together first. We rush off and try to help others. And then, you know, I mean, the number of people I heard, like in the, let's say, during the pandemic, nurses and people living and working in those hospitals, I can't imagine the pain, seeing the immensity of that suffering. Many people killed themselves, didn't they? Because they couldn't bear the pain. Do you understand my point? So the Buddhist analysis is because we've got to work on ourselves first and give up attachment and give up aversion and get more courage and more clarity. Then when you do have compassion for others, you won't lose the plot. Can you hear my point? Does it make sense, Bob, what I'm saying?
Yes.
Are we communicating, people?
Yes.
So we know when it comes to nutrition, you can't just rush off and say eat better if you don't know how to make yourself better. It's ridiculous. You've got to learn wisdom first, learn nutrition. Well, here we're learning the Buddhist analysis about karma and the mind. They're the nuts and bolts of why I'm suffering. So I learned the method to put me together. Abide by the laws of karma, don't harm others, live in vows, practice morality every day, do a meditation. I am the beneficiary of that. Now I can see, oh my God, we're in the same boat. Now I have a basis for helping others. I've got the skills, the wisdom. Do you understand me, Bob?
Yeah.
Good, clear, good. Someone else? Any questions? On the Zoom, any questions? No? Anybody here? Yes, sweetheart.
So, Thich Nhat Hanh
Yes,
was in the monasteries in Vietnam
yes.
when the
All that
horrible,
terrible stuff happened. That's
Yeah.
right.
and so
Do we
then
need the microphone for the lady, please? Where's the microphone? Oh, I've got it.
I can speak louder.
Okay, they want to hear. Are they going to hear?
I
The
think
Zoom
I can
people,
check
can
it
you
out.
hear this lady talking
Hello?
on the Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay, talk,
So
sweetheart, talk.
Thich Nhat Hanh, when he was in the monasteries in Vietnam, and the tremendous political and violent upheaval happened, he and his fellow Buddhists, I don't know how many of them, he sort of realized that, well, he gave birth to engaged Buddhism.
That's right, yeah.
He had to leave the doors of the monastery and go forward.
Yes.
So my question
Yeah.
is, when you do have this attitude about compassion and if you've internalized it,
That's right.
does it very often lead to engaged Buddhism?
It can only do that. That's what the compassion wing means. That's what we're talking here. That term we use for helping others is called engaged, isn't it? Activism. So the Buddhist view, they call it helping others. And it's called, and so this wing, this nice analogy I keep using, the two wings of the bird, the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. So the point of the Buddhist one is the monastery model. You go in, you go internal, you put yourself together. And then the compassion wing is you see the rest of the world suffering, so you walk out the monastery and you help others. That's called engaged Buddhism. Well, another word for that is practicing compassion.
Would the word justice be applied?
What else could it be? I mean, what do you think Tibetans are doing? Look at Tibetans. All the Tibetans living in those monasteries in Tibet, 6 million Tibetans, 1 million were in monasteries, all doing their trip. They're all Buddhists. 99% of Tibetans were Buddhist. doing their thing, learning, studying, meditating, and being useful in their lives. They didn't have a war to worry about. They didn't need armies, and they didn't need to do social engagement. There was no major suffering on the planet. Well, the communists would have said there were, but never mind. Generally speaking, they're all just, if you're brought up properly in that view, you have wisdom and you have compassion, so you help your next door neighbours. You don't need to start a political thing. Do you understand my point? If you're putting it into practice. So then, now the Tibetans, suddenly their country's been taken away, has been slaughtered, destroyed. So they're some of the best political activists you can find. And what's it based on? Called justice. You understand? It would have to be this way. If you think you're compassionate but you never lift your finger, that's not compassion, that's just being lazy. It's got to be helping whoever's in front of you. We mightn't be able to go and change the world, but we can help the dog, the ant, one person. You understand? That's called compassion, that's called engaged, that's called activism. It doesn't have to be a big group. You understand my point? You see what I'm saying? And if you're doing this job properly that we're discussing here from the Buddhist perspective, as more and more you put yourself together using the tools that can help you, you only want to help others because you realize we're all in the same boat. You could not want to help others. Do you understand? Are we communicating?
Mm-hmm.
Good, okay.
Like Mother Teresa.
Hey, all the same. Any of these examples of people, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Thich Nhat Hanh, whether they're religious or not, doesn't matter. It's the same thing. You really see the people like that who stand out. That's why the Dalai Lama has never stopped for 70 years, 75 years being politically active, socially engaged. Do you see my point? Of course, it goes without saying. Yeah.
The almost superhuman from where I sit, part
Yeah.
of it is that he does not express hate.
That's the
The
point.
Dalai
That's exactly the
Lama,
point
the
I'm getting at.
Chinese,
That's exactly right. That's right. That's the point. And that's hard. That's what I'm saying. It's hard for us to hear. And you look at the level of suffering of Tibetans, you know, and the country is basically destroyed, you know. But he hasn't lost the plot. He stayed stable. And all I'm saying is that if I take the Buddhist view as this model of how to live your lives and how to be a benefit to others, he's the perfect example. He's the proof of the pudding, as we say in England. Do we say that in America? Proof of the pudding, don't we? He's the proof of the pudding. You understand? Also, Thich Nhat Hanh. So is Mandela. So is, you know, any of these good examples. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Good point. Yes, somebody else. Yes, sweetheart.
I just want to share this
A
because,
bit louder, darling.
all right. Thank you, Robina.
Good.
Nice to see you this morning.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to share this because I found it was so useful. Now, I have a little bit of trouble with karma, and a little bit of trouble with reincarnation, a little bit of trouble with prayers. Those are things I struggle
Sure.
with. But the point is that someone told me,
A bit louder, sweetheart. You need to be louder. I'm sorry.
okay, Thurman, you know Thurman?
Yes.
Yeah. He said that his teacher told him to get on the subway and just when you're on the subway, just look at the people around you and pick a person and say that one that irritates you. You don't like the way they're dressed or
That's right, sure.
slobbering or something. And think of that person as your mother in another lifetime.
That's right.
It's so practical. So you
That's right.
go through your day,
Yeah.
you're in Deerfield Beach and see people and say, oh, that's my mother.
There you go.
So your heart melts.
There you go.
You know, but some people have had difficult mothers.
Well, that's the point. That's why that's a very interesting point because in this this system, which I haven't begun to discuss, but the equanimity is the first step in. The next step is this logic they use, which is this point, exactly what you said. It's a big one for Tibetans. It's the next step is, given that everyone wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer, the next step to increase this wish to eventually get to the wanting to them to be happy and wanting them not to suffer is to think that all beings have been our mum. I mean, this is beyond hilarious to us. You know, first of all, it's demented. I think even of past lives is too weird for us. But this is, I mean, this is logical. If there are countless lifetimes and countless sentient beings, and our minds are beginningless and endless, it's logical that we've all bumped into each other countless times. Therefore, logically, not just being our mum, but also being our dog and our enemy and our husband. But one of mother is an example they use. This is why, you know, Asians appreciate their mothers. But for us, as Dalai Lama said, he laughs. Well, you Western people don't like your mums, you know. So it seems weird to think everyone's been your mum. So I think whoever's nurtured you is good enough. It's the whole point about why the mother, you know. But some people who love their mums, but this is the next point. So after that, now we're getting to a tricky point. This is a good one. Thank you. The next step in this 11 little techniques, you're going to expand your mind. Now you're going to think about the third step. The third point in the 11 is my mother has been kind. This is too much for our mind. Excuse me. And it's true. Mothers are abusive people. Some mothers can be horrible. This person of mothers mean they're a saint. So what do we do with that? Well, I think it's a pretty interesting way to look at this. Let's do an analysis, okay? Okay, so now, first of all, mother's been kind. What I think, without any analysis, when we say, think about this, when we say someone is kind, I'm sorry to tell you, what we mean is they just did what my attachment wanted. Is that not true? No. You see my point? So it's totally self-centered. So as you do what I want, honey, I'm prepared to love you. And if my mother satisfies all my attachments, needs, and some mothers and children have a good relationship, and they might, then it's easy to see that they're kind. But how about if your mother, like even our discussion yesterday, where was it? He's not here today. Let's say your mum has got some tough love for you, and she's told you 4 times no more chocolate. So she sees that you're not listening. So she says, you go to your room. I told you no more chocolate. And you think mummy's angry with me. But we know she's not angry. That's tough love. So what I'm getting at is that your mother was kind. So this is an approach, if we can be brave enough. Your mother might have been a neurotic. She could have been an alcoholic. She might have been a junkie. She might be a narcissist. She might be possessive. I mean, we all know all human beings have these qualities. But for some reason, it's very fascinating in my mind. I think especially in the Western materialist philosophical view that says your mother is your creator, basically. Your mum makes you. Then, of course, we're going to hate our mother. And you should hate your mother if she really did make you. I'm really not being sarcastic. If let's say Buddha's completely wrong in asserting reincarnation, let's say the Christians are really wrong in asserting God and a soul, then if the Western materialist view is the only truth, that your mother and father had sex and then produced you, then I think you should blame her. If she's some wacko who decides to make another version of another wacko. You get my point here? Really, it's logical. And you're right to blame your mum. But the Buddha says, no, you ran to your mother like a magnet. You've got strong karmic history with her, and however people treat you is how you treated them before. That's what you get in karma, way back earlier in the wisdom wing. So then you got a real basis. But now thinking, yes, my mother was mean. She did do this and do that. Now I'm going to try and do an analysis to remember some things she did that were kind. And I'm sorry, you just can't deny this. We don't want to know about it. Well, what's the first thing she did? You know what? She didn't have an abortion. Are you hearing me? Mm-hmm. We are still alive. It is proof she didn't abort you. I remember there's one guy I met years ago who said his mother told him when he was like 40 that she actually was preparing to have an abortion. She was in the hospital, in her dressing gown, in her robe, in the hospital, ready to go to the gurney to get the baby cut out, and she changed her mind and walked out of the hospital. He was so moved by that, he will never forget it as long as he lived. She chose to give birth to him. Now, your mother did that. And whoever thinks that? Many people, one person I think of now, who gave her baby away when she was 17. When I was 23, I had an abortion. 2 of my sisters had an abortion. We said, oh, have an abortion. It's easy. She said, no. But she had her baby in the 60s. Then she gave the baby away. Now, she met that girl 30 years later, and that girl hates her mother. You gave me away. I know that that person I'm talking about suffered unbearably to give that baby away. But she doesn't think that. You see my point? She doesn't think that. So we don't think that. We just go, my mother's mean. Well, she didn't abort you, please. And it's incredible. If someone runs and saves you from having a car accident, you'll never forget their kindness as long as they live. Are we communicating? There's lots of reasons that, okay, your mother might be neurotic, but I think she fed you. She probably helped you wipe your little bottom when you had to learn. She helped you tie your shoelaces, even though she was drunk. You can't say she didn't do those good things. But we don't like to think it. We want to paint her with a whole brush, an evil mother, because attachment thinks I should have a perfect mother. Why we think our mother should be a saint? I don't know why, but it's very fascinating, isn't it? Why do we assume that we must have a saint for a mother? It's very fascinating. I've got to admit that. Don't you see? It's very strange, isn't it? So it's very, yourself, if anybody, because you've done one mean thing or 20 mean things, you might have, and they see you only in that way and they never forgive you. You know the pain of that. If you're a mother and your daughter does that to you, the pain is unbearable because they see you as a monster. They paint you with their angry brush. We know it's just not true. So it's very humbling to do this exercise. You get my point here? And I mean, the number of friends I've got who hated their mums, You know, and then have literally changed their view of their mother, remembered the good things, remembered the kind things, and start to actually see a human being there, and then learn to love their mother. You understand? And then without even Buddhism, you do that. I mean, one of my sisters says the years and years of struggles with one of her daughters. Finally, the daughter's 42 now, and they adore each other. Their views have changed, you know. We know this is true. It's a very profound action for oneself to do this, a very profound exercise, but you've got to want to do it, you know. It's a really tasty one. See all beings of your mum, see their kindness. And the next step is you want to repay their kindness. Now we're starting to get towards love and compassion. It's like these incremental steps. They're like people do retreats for years doing these incremental steps until eventually they get this bodhicitta, you know. It's very profound. So really all these things, often when we think about getting love and compassion, we think about it as all sentimental and gooey. You know, I'll do a compassion meditation, have tears. Oh, wow, I feel so compassionate. Next minute you want to kill people because they make a big noise. This is using logic to argue with ego's absurd views, and it's really hard work. It's intense therapy. We know that. And who's the beneficiary? We are. We're communicating, people. Any other questions? Anybody on Zoom questions? About anything, doesn't matter. Nobody.
One common thing is
Yeah.
for people that, there's somebody who like a mother who takes care of the child and very loving, kind for the whole life, then does something very, very bad the child disagrees with.
So, say it again. What? So there's a mother.
Or a person who does a lot of great things, help other people, and then finally there's one thing at the end where you just don't agree and it really hurts you.
Who doesn't agree with whom?
If you that one person does something to offend you.
Who was the? Sorry, there's a mother who's good to other people.
Yep.
Then go on.
Could be a mother, a relative, friend, politician,
Go on.
and the one thing they did after years of great service, you disagree with.
Who disagrees with? The world or one person?
I would.
Okay, and then so what then?
How do you overlook that?
Oh, I see your point. Well, that's what we're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's exactly the point. That's the whole point I'm making. So think of yourself first. I suppose if you're a normal human being, would you agree that sometimes you've done some mean things to people? Would you agree with that? And you know how painful it is if that one person never forgives you and thinks you are evil because of that one action. You know how, and you know not only how painful it is, but you know it's not true. You did do the thing, but it doesn't define you. That's when you know that for yourself, then you can do it for the other person who's harmed you. Don't you agree with that?
Look at ourselves first.
You've got to look first. I think that's the wisdom wing. You know, we all